is Amy Julian, and I am the director for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. We are very excited to have you here as part of our LEAD series, Leadership Excellence Action and Development. Again, this series is put together for OET, specifically for OET, and so we want to meet your needs. A couple little housekeeping items as we move through. First thing is you will be getting an evaluation for this on Monday. It comes out 24 working hours after the session. So you'll get that on Monday as an email. So please do evaluate and let us know how we're doing. The other thing is if you miss this or if you hear a friend or colleague say, you know what, I had a conflict, I had a meeting, I wasn't able to attend on Friday, what happened, what great things were going on. We do have the OET webpage on our website, and all of the recordings are posted there. So if you missed last month and you've heard great things about that presentation and want to go check it out, it's there for you to be viewed, and all the resources are there as well. So with that, good morning, everyone. I want to just get us started. Right now, this is a Zoom meeting, so you have the ability to unmute yourself if you want to engage in that way. We're going to be using the chat today. We're going to be using the chat for polling as well. So some fun and exciting ways in which we're going to be able to engage. But we're here today to talk about synergy and that lovely idea of synergy. And do you have it? And what are some steps that we can really look at on really allowing us to not only have synergy within our team, but build synergy within our team? This has been a challenging year. I think that just goes without saying. Everybody knows that. But one of the things that we want to talk about is making sure as we have new people come into our team, new people come into our family, our space, our work family, how do we build synergy? So we're going to talk about roles today. We're going to talk about some other fun stuff, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to introduce our presenter. Today, our presenter will be Kirsten Baer, and she is our online marketing coordinator at ICSPS. She is also a instructional professor of communications and marketing, and she has both a bachelor's and a master's in communication and marketing, so she is our content expert. You will also hear today from both me, Amy Julian, and then Molly Cook, who is our workforce training coordinator, and Molly has a great deal of experience in working with different areas in the field and has also been, many of you have worked with her in her capacity with my center, but also comes out of that university setting as well and working with communication and marketing with local programs. So our agenda for today is really looking at the benefits of group work. So that's pretty much a lot of what we do, right? When we are looking at work that we're completing, there's very few and far between where you're doing something in isolation. So this topic is really so essential to the success of OET and the success of the workforce system. So what are the benefits of group work? We're going to talk about what is group synergy and what that looks like, and then some group dynamics. We are going to kind of have some intimate dialogue, so you can choose to put that in the chat, or if you feel more comfortable putting it on a scratch pad next to you so it's more private, please do so. But we are going to ask you to do some self-reflection. We are going to ask you to see if you have been these different roles, and so what that looks like. We're going to talk about group think, and we're going to talk about action tips. So what are things that you can take back, you can start doing today, you can start doing next week. The way in which you make change is small changes over a long amount of time, and every little change helps. So looking at ways in which we can move that in. We're going to talk about the different roles within a group, and I will tell you, depending on what group you walk into, depends on what role you have. And I'm very aware of that. There are particular meetings where I'm the leader of the meeting, and there's particular meetings where I am there as the content expert, and then there's other particular meetings that I'm just there to learn. And so your roles do change. And I think that's important to really identify what your role is as you walk into a meeting. And then that last part we're going to talk about today is connection. So as we get going and get started and want to move forward, I want to talk to you about this first poll. So I'd like you to put in the chat, have you ever had a challenging experience? Oh, no, it's a poll. Thank you, Kirsten. Sorry. Miscommunication there on my part. Have you ever had a challenging experience in working with a group? Any group. If you've never had a challenging experience, I think you and I need to talk over drinks at another time. But I want to know if anyone's ever had a challenging experience working in a group. Maybe someone has some different roles that we'll talk about today. Numbers are coming in. It looks like all of you have had some kind of challenging experience. So the great news about that is that you will get some tips and tricks and some ideas of how to deal with those challenging experiences. The downside of that is, yes, we've all experienced a time when we've been in a group setting and there has been some challenging experience. So our next activity I'd like to go through with you is in the chat or on a scratch pad, again, depending on how much you're feeling like sharing today. It is Friday morning, so some people might just not have that embracement to them. I'd like to ask you, what was the challenge in your group work experience? And then can you describe what made that group work experience challenging or unpleasant? So if you want to put some one-word answers or some short narratives in the chat, that's great. We'd love to share. If you feel more comfortable putting that on a scratch pad, but we do want you to be thinking about what was that challenging experience in your group, and then what made the group experience challenging or unpleasant. And while you're doing that, I'm going to just go a little sidebar. So me personally, and I know I've worked with a lot of you, so you're not going to be surprised at this, but one of the things that I find very challenging in a group setting is, and Kirsten's going to help us identify these people, but is that individual, I'm not saying who they are, but you've all seen them, somebody who just says no. When you're working on a project, you're working to move something forward, and someone's just like, nope, and gives no feedback, no information. So for me, that is the most challenging. I am a question asker. You all know that. I am somebody who really wants to get to the yes. How do we get things moved forward? How do we improve the system? How do we work to make things more accessible for individuals? So when someone just says no, it just kind of, shuts down the conversation, and I'm one who just wants to ask more and more questions. And so that's a challenge for me, but I love some of these things that are coming in the chat. So picking up the slack from others, lack of direction, I understand that. Frustration in dealing with people who delegate but do not pull their own weight. Ooh, that's a good one. Communication, huge issue that can really affect the group. If you have good communication, it's essential for good teamwork. And then both sides, some overshare and others don't contribute at all. And we've had that since grade school, haven't we? That when you do a group assignment, I mean, think about, roll yourself back. Think about how in some instances you had people who would do a lot of work, and then you had other instances when people just didn't really step up. But I really want to thank you for all these great comments in the box there in the chat. No real group direction, lack of planning, and respect for others' time. I am right there with you. I am a very much start on time, end on time kind of gal. So with that, I want to thank you for continuing to put those in the chat. It's really going to help this conversation. And I want to hand the floor over now to Kirsten. And she's going to talk with us about the benefits of group work. So Kirsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. So my name is Kirsten Baer. I work on Amy's team, and she kind of already introduced myself. But so we just focused and reflected on the challenges of group work. And I think no one can negate that, right? We've all experienced it. That little poll with, have you ever had a challenging group work experience? I think you would be hard pressed to find someone who hasn't, right? But there are benefits to working in groups. And I think if we can effectively learn how to do that, and at least if we give ourselves the tools to self-reflect as individuals on the group roles that we will be talking about in later slides, it gives us the opportunity to better our own work ability to work within groups and foster more of these benefits of working with groups. So group work is associated with deeper learning, strong information retention, and the acquisition of valuable communication and teamwork skills. And so some benefits of group work is to foster that creativity. Creativity and collaboration thrives when people work together on a team. And I think we've all experienced this firsthand, but from my personal experience, our team at ICSPS is super small. We are a team of 8. And so when we get to work collaboratively together, whether it's just a couple of us or all as a team, the ideas really flow and we rely on each other a lot. and we know each other's skill set and strengths. And so that we use that to benefit the output of our work. And then that goes along with the second benefit, to blend complementary strengths. And so the more you get to know your coworkers or your group members, their professional strengths and even potentially their personal strengths as well, it can help to build that trust, which is the next benefit of group work. And benefits of group work also helps to teach conflict resolution skills for ourselves as well as our coworkers, and it promotes a wider sense of ownership, which I love that benefit of group work, because not only are you owning the output of your project and you can be proud of it, but your whole office can, or your whole group can. And it promotes that wider sense of ownership within your office, and helps promote that coworker relationship. And then the last benefit is to encourage healthy risk taking. I think people are more inclined to take a risk when they're in a group, working within a group setting, because if potentially that risk goes wrong, they have, more people to help pick up the slack, or to help make that risk go right, or to help make that risk be worth it, and to carry on the project and the work at hand. It doesn't all just fall on them. So people are more likely to take risks when they're working in group work, and that can be really healthy and typically benefit and make our output of our work greater. And you can go to the next slide, please, Molly. And so that's just the brief benefits of group work. And so we want to discuss this concept of group synergy. And this is something that I teach a lot in my college courses when I'm adjuncting, as well as something that we try to push within our group work in our offices. But group synergy is this idea that the output is greater than the sum of its parts. And so I think we're all familiar with this on maybe a more basic level, but it's just the idea that when we all get together, that collaboration and creativity flows, and whatever our work output is, whatever that project is, it's going to be ultimately better, since we have, that concept that more brains are better than one type of thing. So that's really what group synergy is. And so to be able to define that, we can work towards that as our goal with our small group dynamics, to have that goal of effective group synergy. Please move on to the next slide, Molly. And this is for you, Molly, so I'll let you take this slide.
All right. So one part that occurs when a group is forming and starting up is that you go through all of these stages of developing as a group. So a good way to remember it is forming, storming, norming, and performing. So I'm going to use an example to walk through these, and I'm going to use an example of, I don't know if any of you enjoy doing like athletics or activities, but I'm going to use, let's say that we're forming a committee to plan a 5K. Okay. So the forming stage is when you're first starting up and you're really excited. You're really excited to plan this 5K and get it going. And so you're just getting to know the group and what your identity is. The next phase is storming. So this means two things. This could mean storming in terms of brainstorming. So what are your tasks at hand? What are the goals of the group? In my example of planning a 5K, what is the date going to be? Where are you going to have this event? Storming also can mean something else. It's also when there's kind of that determination of roles within the group. So who's going to be the group leader? Who tends to speak up more? It's recognizing people's personality types and starting to find the balance within that. Like Kirsten mentioned, it's really nice when a group gets to a point when you can identify each other's strengths and build on those, but it takes time to figure out what everyone is strong at. In the next phase, norming, this is where the group is figuring out what their flow is and really getting into the work. People have figured out how the personalities work together, where the strengths lie, and they've gotten past the phases of knowing their goals, and they're getting started on their work plan, or in my example of planning a race, a 5K race, they're getting started in launching the event and taking signups and really digging into everything. The final phase is performing. So this is when you are getting to the point of reaching your goal, reaching those final tasks, and creating an outcome. Now, every once in a while, they have a final one, which I left off, which is when the group ends or moves on. But I mean, some groups are long-term groups, or in a workplace, you're in your group for a while. So just think of these to remember how small groups flow and develop.
And this next slide is really just looking at some tips for team synergy. And many of you know I am like neck deep in basketball. We have a 6-week season and both my boys are playing, so I'm going to use some sports analogies here. But as we talk about being clear, in order for a team to cooperate properly, everyone on the team needs to know what the objective is. I saw a lot of those coming into the chat: communication, lack of planning, things of that nature. So everyone needs to know what the objective is, and everyone's objectives need to be the same. If you've ever been on a team where you either have an unclear objective or people are working toward different goals or coming with their own agendas, that kind of messes with the mojo of the team. Different team members will obviously be filling different functions in the pursuit of the goal, but different objectives create chaos and conflict. The same goes for the goals that aren't clear. If we are just arbitrarily throwing a goal out there, it's not going to be an attainable goal. So I'm a big, I think it's Harvey's fan of start with the end in mind. Start with the end goal in mind. Goals need to be clearly defined for each person to understand what success looks like and how they're meant to achieve it. In other words, a team, we'll take basketball because that's where my head is right now. If we're going and everyone's shooting for different hoops, that team won't be winning the game. We've all seen that, hopefully not in like an NBA or a college setting, but we've seen it in especially like an 8-year-old setting where somebody shoots at the wrong hoop, they get the points to the wrong team. That's not really good. Think of that in your work application of we want to be sure everything is clear. The next spot there is communicate. Again, highlighted in the chat. I think we're all on the same page talking about this. But once everyone knows where the hoop is, to go back to my sports analogy, the team needs to communicate so each player knows what his or her team needs from them. If you've watched basketball, you know they communicate out there on the team. Last night we were watching volleyball, and it amazed me how much those girls, community college volleyball, how much they all talk to each other. But communication is key to success. Naturally, most communication happens in the planning phase, whether it's a sports team or a business team, that planning phase is really essential. But once it's game time, once you're really at those throws, everyone is set to a task and filling their roles. But you still need those huddles and those timeouts to make sure strategies are being achieved. The key to finding balance between direct and polite. So I will speak for myself. There are some times that I am very direct, but I also have to remember that different people have different things coming at a meeting or coming into a situation. So we want to be polite. We want to be conscious of others' situations, but we also still want to be direct. Be clear with your needs or instructions. And the clearer the goal is, the better you are at achieving them. Be mindful of the burden of stress that you're placing on your team. Think about what else is going on. For example, right now, there is a lot of things going on within the state that's impacting your work. There's a lot of things going on federally that's impacting your work. So when we're throwing one more thing to a team, or if we're throwing one more thing at a team, let's be mindful of their stress. Let's be sure that we're considering how this new project or this new thing will change that team dynamic. And what can you do to evolve people's responsibilities in achieving those goals? The next thing is so important for a team and team synergy, and it's empowerment. So I'd like to define empowerment as the extent to which someone provides encouragement, tools, and authority to others, enabling them to use their power, talents, and skills effectively. So how much do you trust your team, and how much does your team trust you? Going back to the sports analogy, a good coach trains his or her team to be well instilled in each player that the beliefs that they are fully capable of completing the task at hand. So the coach says, we can do this. The coach says, this is what we're going to do. Set clear goals. We can do this. Here's your roles. Here's how we move forward. Then the coach steps back and lets the team play. Back to basketball, you don't see the coaches of the teams going out there and shooting the hoops with the team. You see them giving instruction, giving guidance, and letting them go forward. Likewise, though, a good teammate doesn't try to hog the ball or the spotlight. They know that all of the success for the team is more important than the success of any single individual. So they help each other out, they trust their teammates, and they trust their teammates to do the same. And I know, because I'm familiar with OET, you guys have some new people coming in, and you have some people who have been on the job. I think I was talking to one gentleman last night, 2 weeks, right, Andy? 2 weeks. There's a lot of different dynamics that they're coming into, but also as each team member comes in, you're changing the dynamic of the team because you bring resources and you bring your knowledge and you bring all of those things. So back to Kirsten's point about we need to showcase our and really highlight what are the strengths of the team. We also want to be sure our leadership has empowerment. So showing your team you have faith in their abilities and that you trust them to do their job well is as important or even most important for that team leader. A team with no faith in itself is likely not to succeed. Last part there is commitment. Being a member of a team requires personal commitment, dedication to the overall success of the team. This ties closely to the empowerment because a team can't function properly if no one trusts their teammates to have their back. Each player needs to be confident that the teammate and the coach are committed to supporting them and that they won't be left high and dry. Um, Success requires dedication, and dedication is predicted by commitment. So just like your high school basketball team, or just like the basketball team I've been talking about, your team members jointly leaving all the situation in different times, and different temperaments, abilities, and interests and risk taking can create conflict, but can also really enrich your team. So I challenge you to look at ways in which you can enrich the team by being clear, communicating, and allowing for empowerment and stating commitment. I'm going to hand it back over to Kirsten.
Great. Thank you. Next slide. There we go. So I want to talk about this idea of groupthink, or this concept of groupthink. And so we're kind of going back and forth between all the great things about working within a group and then, maybe some of the more challenging things. And so as you guys were putting in the chat and reflecting on your group experiences that you've had in the past, you might actually identify with this concept of groupthink, which is when members of the group are more concerned with getting the task done as opposed to getting it done right. If you've ever been a part of a group like that or had group members who have this mentality that they are more focused and more concerned about just getting it done, getting the work done, and just being done with it, as opposed to actually doing it right, doing it to the best of the group's ability, and doing it effectively. And so that is this idea of groupthink. This is something we want to try to avoid within working within small group dynamics, but it's an important concept to understand because I think even sometimes we can be guilty of, I know I can be guilty of having groupthink sometimes whenever you have a lot on your plate and you just need to get that one task done, to check it off of your list to move forward with the rest of your projects, right? And so sometimes we can be guilty of this, but I think if we understand the concept, it will help us to better negate or not incorporate this within our groups. If you could go to the next slide, please. Some things to consider when we're forming our groups and part of that forming stage that Molly touched on, as well as when we're considering things that we want to avoid, like groupthink, and when leaders are considering, assigning projects to specific employees or people within your offices and creating those groups, is to consider that group size. And so the more people in the group, the more schedules you have to accommodate, more parts of the tasks that you have to delegate, opinions you have to consider, and pieces to integrate within whatever that project is or whatever you want the output to be. And so to consider that group size, does this project require 10 people, or does it require more? Four people would be able to effectively get that project done. So just considering that. And then the second consideration is task interdependence. And so tasks in which group members are highly reliant on one another at all stages, they tend to have higher coordination costs than tasks that allow group members to divide and conquer, but still allow for those collaborative goals. So is this task, you want to consider the group size, but is there enough tasks to delegate to each group member, or are there going to be some overlap? And overlap in tasks can create confusion sometimes. No one really knows who's doing what. and then things can fall through the cracks potentially. That's also where that communication aspect comes in as well. But you want to potentially consider the amount of tasks, and then along with the group size, how many people can take on those tasks and complete them effectively. You still want to be able to allow the group to collaborate and be creative together, but that ability to be able to divide and conquer allows everyone to have a responsibility within the group to know exactly what's expected of them. And that helps build that trust back onto the group benefit slide that we touched on earlier. And then this third thing to consider is heterogeneity. And so heterogeneity of group members tends to potentially raise coordination costs if there's issues to contend with, if there's language issues or cultural differences to bridge, or if there's a separate or a disparity in skill sets to integrate. But diversity is also that diversity perspective is also one of the biggest advantages of working within groups. So it's not necessarily something that you want to avoid, but just something to consider how different team members who have different skill sets are going to best form that that group to best create your output. Sorry. And next slide, please. This next slide is talking about strategies to form those groups. So just some kind of best practices when looking to form those groups: to keep the groups small, designate time for regular group meetings, use group skill inventories to help teams delegate those tasks and subtasks. So again, the more you know your group skill set, maybe even if you're working with a new group of people and you don't really know their skill set, I mean, who knows you better than you know yourself, right? So have that initial meeting, introduce yourselves, talk about what your skill set is, who's comfortable taking on what tasks. I know that's something that we've always done in our offices and in my past experiences working with groups. Like, okay, I know I'm really, really good at this, or I'm good at that. I can take that task on. Or, hey, Amy, I know you're really good at this part of the content. You take this slide during our presentation, whatever that looks like, delegating those tasks and subtasks. And that helps you assign those roles, and then that helps you assign those roles. And then you also want to potentially allow employees to use digital tools that facilitate remote and/or asynchronous meetings. I think we're doing this already, right? In this world that we live in this pandemic year and a half that or I guess almost a year now that we're approaching March. But allowing employees to use those to facilitate remote or asynchronous meetings potentially in the future as our world is going back into the workplace. And then designate time in the project schedule for the group to integrate parts. So you want to make sure that you have that last meeting or that last checkpoint or check-in time to make sure that all of the divide and conquer tasks that you enforced or delegated come together and integrate. And go to the next slide, please, Molly. And so next we're going to talk about group roles, which is, this is going to incorporate a big part of our reflection piece. And so there's 3 different kinds of group roles. And as I'm defining these, you might reflect and think, oh, I've definitely been that person within a group, or I know someone, or I know Molly's that person within our office, or what have you. So task roles help the group accomplish the goals. So their main role is to accomplish the goal, whatever that goal may be. And then relationship roles is to provide social needs of the group. So they are focused more on that relationship aspect. And then disruptive roles also come into play, which is where individuals put their needs above the group. And so these roles, it's important to note that you can take on more than one. I know depending on the group size, sometimes I feel the need to take on multiple task roles. Sometimes if I'm having a bad day and we have a meeting, I can take on a disruptive role, just that one day. And sometimes, I might meet a new coworker or a new person that I've never worked with before. And I start to focus on that relationship, maybe one of those relationship roles, because I want to build that relationship with that new coworker, that new acquaintance that I'm being exposed to. So go to the next slide, please, Molly. So the first set of roles are task roles. And so there's multiple task roles that anyone can take on. You can take on multiple of these at one time as well. But there's the initiator, which helps the group by proposing ideas right away. So that's that person that walks in the group meeting and they're like, hey, I think we should do this. Or like, I was thinking about this to do this task. I think this would be a really good idea. So they are the person that walks in the meeting and they have the ideas right away and they start proposing them. So they initiate the conversation. Then you have the information seeker or the giver. They ask for ideas from others and they share opinions. So not only do they don't really propose new ideas right away, but they ask for those ideas from others, and then they kind of share their opinion on those ideas. And then the organizer, the organizer is someone who helps keep the group on task. They organize meetings, they share agendas, they send calendar invites, they make sure all the documents are sent out to everyone. That's kind of the organizer. So many of you probably have taken on the organizer role. I know I have. And then clarifier is someone who asks questions to make sure everyone understands. So I think Amy would argue she has definitely been a clarifier, and she typically is. That's in her nature to take on that task role. So to ask those questions and to make sure that everyone understands their tasks and what's expected of them. And then elaborator is someone who expands on the ideas of others. So they take those opinions or those ideas from maybe someone who's the initiator, and they kind of take it that next step further. So I know I am typically an initiator within our office, and I have these really good ideas, but I don't know how to effectively execute them. I've only worked for our office for a year, so I'm still learning, you know, all the entities and all of the organizations and government entities that we work with within our office. So I have these really good ideas, but I don't necessarily always know how to execute them. So that elaborator takes on my new ideas and expands on them. And then the evaluator is someone who is positively but critically reflects on all of those ideas and offers maybe some value judgments or suggestions on how to tweak them or, you know, make them better to better fit the goal of that project. And you can go to the next slide, please, Molly. And this next slide is a reflection poll. So now that we've covered all of those task roles, I know that was a lot, we're going to put up a reflection poll. So have you ever taken one of these task roles? And that poll is up now. So we'll give you, you know, a minute to a minute and a half to answer, because this is kind of a question to get you thinking and reflecting on your experience as an individual. But do you feel like you have ever, and you can check all that apply, you can select more than one. Amy,
I was going to say, Kirsten, that's one of the fun points is please check all that apply, because as Kirsten has demonstrated, people move in and out of different roles. I will say in the private sector, I'm going to throw my husband's company under the bus. He has this thing called a carefrontation. So it's that evaluator role. It's I'm going to be positive, but I'm going to be critical. I care about you and I care about the work and I care about the system, but we need to have a talk about the quality of what's happening. So I don't know that we're going to embrace carefrontation in the public sector, but it is just that idea of you have to move into different roles depending on the situation. Sorry to interrupt. I see a lot of great polls coming in.
Great, thank you, Amy. So yeah, do you see yourself taking on the initiator and maybe the organizer? Are you more of the elaborator and the organizer? And this can be, you know, you might take on different roles depending on who you're working with, because they might have a better strength as the organizer than you. So you know that and you're aware of that. So you don't feel the need to fulfill that role within a certain group setting. But maybe in a different group setting, you are the most organized person. So you do take on that role. That's why it's so important to do these self-reflections, because you need to really know yourself and also get to know your group members to really effectively perform within a group. So we've given you about 2 minutes now, and a little over half of you have voted. So these are completely, well, we'll give, some people are still voting, so we'll give you a couple more seconds. I did also want to note that these reflection polls on the task roles and relationship roles and disruptive roles that we're about to do, they are completely 100% anonymous. So you will, I mean, we can't see who answers what, and no one else can see that these polls are completely anonymous. So you can feel free to answer as honestly as you can, and you would like to self-reflect. If you're not comfortable answering any of these, please feel free to maybe just jot them down on your scratch pad, like Amy has noted in the past, and maybe do that, your self-reflection that way. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And so this is really interesting. So 12 out of the 17 of you, 71%, feel that you've taken on the initiator role in a group. 13 of you feel you've taken on the information seeker. 12 of you feel like you have taken on the organizer role. The clarifier role is 12 of you, and elaborator is 9. Mark would like to know, and Amy did have to, she's still on, but she kind of had to step away because she had to jump on another meeting. So,
Nope, I'm still here.
oh, okay, I'm sorry. But Mark asked a question in the chat if you would like to address it, Amy.
Yes, okay. So we can all see that. Is the question, is there expectation that the lead would assign some or all of
these roles? He's talking about the task roles.
It can evolve different ways, Mark. So in some situations, when we talk about group dynamic and what we were talking about, at the beginning, that you have the coach and the basketball team, in some situations, you want to have that person assigned. You want the team lead to be assigning that. So here's the task at hand. We have this feasibility study to do. Let's divvy up the work, and you handle this part, and you handle this part, and you handle this part. But then in other situations, there are duties that come, and Mark, you and I have worked together on a number of things. So like with the evaluation work group that we're working on, these roles really come from the expertise and then those individuals who are volunteering. And I think in those situations, it is also very transforming and fluid. So in some meetings, maybe you're the initiator, and then in other meetings, you're playing the role of the organizer. But then as we're moving into the development of that evaluation tool that we're all working on, your role, I know now, has become kind of that clarifier, asking questions, making sure, but then you're also playing a role of the elaborator, which is expanding on the ideas and making sure that we're getting the tool for everyone else. We're working on essential elements of evaluation tool for the system and making sure that we have all the correct data and information in there. So I think they do occur naturally depending on the work group, but sometimes they need to be assigned depending on the task at hand. Mark, did that answer your question?
And Mark, you can unmute yourself too.
And a lot of it comes down to the task and also the dynamic of the team. Some of you might be on a team that you guys have your team meetings weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, and these are the things that we're working on. And then there's other times that we're all coming together to solve a problem. And I know for our team, we have different dynamics depending on the audience and what the issue is.
Right. Great. Well, thank you, Amy. And then
thank you.
The next slide, Molly. So next is the relationship roles. And so there's not as many of these, but you can either take on the role of the gatekeeper, which is someone who sees that everyone is involved in an open discussion, someone who encourages participation among all the members and helps to control the flow of the conversation. So I would say typically the leader of the group or the highest ranking person within the group should hopefully take on the gatekeeper role if they want everyone to be involved in that open discussion, because it helps kind of eliminate anyone who might be hesitant to participate in that open discussion. So if the leader of the group or the person, I guess, quote unquote, in charge of setting up the group can take on that gatekeeper role. It definitely promotes more of that open discussion, encourages participation. But sometimes that's not always the leader. It might be someone else who feels inclined to do so and take on that role. There's also the harmonizer. So the harmonizer is someone who helps to settle conflicts between members, helps to maintain that peace within the group. So you kind of want to, your goal is to help have the output of that group be within harmony. So you can remember it that way. And then the tension reliever is someone who uses humor to relieve tension when there's conflict or deadlines are looming. We probably know someone who typically likes to crack a joke when things get a little too serious, maybe. And then the supporter. So this supporter is someone who encourages those positive feelings. They might console someone or counsel other members of the group. And so these relationship roles are just as important as the task roles as we are working collaboratively within the group. And so the next slide, please, Molly, is another reflection poll on if you've ever taken on one of these relationship roles. Again, this is completely anonymous. You can select more than one. So you can select all that apply. And if you don't feel comfortable answering the poll, you can self-reflect using your scratch pad. But if you ever feel that you've taken on one of these roles, it does help us to self-reflect and kind of acknowledge and define, our place within working in groups. I know for myself, I typically am a tension reliever. When things might get a little too serious, I tend to use humor or like a personal narrative to relieve that tension within a group. I've seen Amy do that multiple times as well. And I also like to be kind of that supporter role. So I encourage those feelings, or if, another group member is getting a little stressed out, consoling them and, maybe helping taking things off of their plate. That's definitely something that I try to do in my group settings. So it's been a little over a minute. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And it looks like 40% of you typically take on maybe that gatekeeper role. And then 80% feel that you take on a harmonizer role. So that was the most of you said that you have taken on that harmonizer role in the past. Working with people does result sometimes in conflict. So it's important to have those people in our workplace or in our group setting that do take on that harmonizer role. They help to maintain the peace, and that helps with the task getting done in the end. And then 7 of you say you relate to being a tension reliever potentially, and 11 of you relate to being a supporter as well. So that was a great reflection. Thank you for participating. We'll move on to the next slide, please, Molly. And this slide might be kind of the one that potentially could ruffle some feathers. So that's why I've been reiterating time and time again that these reflection polls are completely anonymous. We cannot even pull your names from what you answer at all. I triple checked that. But again, if you don't feel comfortable answering the poll on these roles, which is in the next slide, but you can stay on this slide, Molly, then feel free to just write down on your scratch pad. But we're going to define these disruptive roles. And this might be a role that you take on, just in one meeting, that you just have had a bad day and you're just over the work week. It's Friday, ready to be done, and you just need a break, which is completely understandable. We all get burnt out, right? And so sometimes we take on these disruptor roles just one day or one time or one setting. But you also might know someone that takes on these disruptive roles all the time. And that might just be the way that they work in groups. Maybe they don't work very well in groups collaboratively. And that could be something that the leaders who are forming the groups, that could be another thing to consider, is who typically does take on those disruptive roles. And we might want to avoid putting them to work in groups. Maybe they work better individually. But the first disruptive role is considered a blocker. So this is someone who, we've touched on this at the beginning of this presentation, but someone who opposes ideas but offers no solutions. So that person that says no, but they don't like it. So I think it was Patrick, you said in the beginning of this conversation that one of the things that's the most challenging is when you have someone who says no, but I'm trying to find what you said, Patrick, but you said you agree you love groups that come from a place of yes. And so the blocker is that person who comes from a place of no. And I don't think, we're not obviously not telling you never to say no, but I think you can say no, but offer solutions, right? If you are the person who has to say no, or you know, maybe we need to shuffle a different way, you don't automatically have to become a blocker if you offer solutions or a different path to get to that end goal. So the blocker is someone who just says no, but offers no solutions or doesn't give any feedback as to why they don't like your idea. And then the avoider is someone who just completely refuses to participate. They just are non-existent within the group. That's just they're avoiding. And then the credit seeker is someone who tries to take credit for other group members' ideas or the workload of the whole group. So if they say that they produced this outcome individually, even though it was a group effort, they're taking the credit of the whole group. So that's a credit seeker. The distractor is someone who tries to get the group off of track by acting silly or talking off a subject. Sometimes I can be guilty of that because I'm a talker and our office is really, you know, we're comfortable with each other. We know things about each other's personal lives, which isn't a bad thing. We check in with each other and, you know, like, how's your fiance, Molly? How's your kids, Amy? You know, Amy talks about her kids all the time, which is great. And we like to check in with each other on that. But sometimes we can take on those roles of the distractor when we do that because we're talking off of subject, right? And we need to get back on task. So I think we can all be guilty of taking that distractor role from time to time. But it's important to check in with our coworkers, but it's also important to get back on track. So that distractor role is that person who continually does that over and over and over in that group setting and doesn't really get back on track. And then the dominator is someone who just monopolizes the whole discussion. They basically prevent others from expressing their ideas, and they want to just make sure that all the work gets done because they want to do it. So if you've ever been in a group setting where someone's just like, oh, I'll just do that because I know how to do it, or I've done it before, and they don't really give you the opportunity or the chance to maybe have a new experience. And instead of being like, oh yeah, that'd be great, Molly, if you take on that task, but hey, I've done that before. So would you like any help on that? Or like, maybe I can offer some suggestions on how to complete that. Instead of being that person, you're more like, oh no, Molly, I've done that before. So I'll just take that on. Patrick said in the chat, some of these really amplify others on this list. Absolutely, they do. He says the dominator enables the avoider. That's very true. So if you have a dominator within your group setting, other group members tend to become avoiders almost subconsciously, right? Because they're just like, well, you know, Patrick's going to do all the work. Not to call you out, Patrick, but I'm just using it as an example. But Patrick's going to do all this work. So why am I even in this group? I guess I don't have to do anything. So they become the avoider and they just refuse to participate. So yeah, we'll go to the next slide, please, Molly, and we'll start the poll while we keep talking about these. But again, another reflection poll, and 100%, if you do not feel comfortable answering this, you do not have to. You can reflect on your own scratch pad or just, you know, do your own self-reflection. But again, these are completely anonymous. So if you yourself have ever taken on one of these disruptor roles, I do think it's important to identify and know this about ourselves. The more we can self-reflect, the more we can learn and grow. I think we can carry that mentality into our personal and professional lives, right? So like I've talked about how sometimes I can be a distractor. Sometimes I can even be an avoider depending on who I'm working with. If I've worked with them in the past and had a bad experience working with that person or a bad group experience working with that group, I tend to shut down kind of and want to avoid. And that can be disruptive and destructive to that overall group synergy that we're trying to achieve. Remember that group synergy is our overall goal. So the disruptor roles are definitely things that leaders want to take into account as you get to know your employees. But also if you take into account yourself, as we're doing this reflection right now, that you yourself know that sometimes you do take on that distractor role. It can kind of help you to not do that if you're aware of it, you know? So these are coming in, and it's been about a minute and a half. So we'll end that poll and I'll share the results so you can kind of see, but some of you did do some great self-reflection. So I hope that you do take these concepts and you can move forward from them and potentially learn from them and grow from them in your future group work. Okay, so moving on, please go to the next slide, Molly. We have about 10 minutes here, and I do want to allow time for questions. So we only have a couple more slides, so we'll cover these briefly. But group norms are that idea to have expectations of behavior for how each member participates within the group. So these might be implicit or explicit. So some implicit group norms that you might have are implicit group norms are things that are not directly stated. So like an example of this is pre-COVID, typically when you meet a new coworker in your office, you might shake their hand when you meet them for the first time. No one said, hey, I'm meeting you for the first time, Molly, shake my hand. No one comes out and says that, right? That's custom for our country, for a custom greeting. And so that's implicitly not directly stated. We've indirectly observed that, and it's kind of like an unspoken rule that we did that, obviously talking pre-pandemic. But so that's an implicit rule. So you might have those implicit group norms within your group because you've worked with those people before, you know kind of how they operate. And so you have those implicit norms you don't really need to discuss, but there might be things that you do need to discuss. And that's where those explicit norms come in, and they are directly stated, they're formal rules. And an example of this would be maybe creating a group contract or even creating a work plan and kind of knowing those expectations. And that's where that explicit group norms comes into play. And then next slide, please, Molly. So I did want to focus a little bit on group contracts and creating one and the benefits of it, but it allows your group to know the expectations that you have for them as a leader of that group, or if your group does a group contract collaboratively, it lets everyone to kind of know where their responsibility lies. And then again, what tasks need to be completed specifically by them, kind of that divide and conquer mentality. It also allows you to outline the processes for how you're going to complete the group, maybe schedule team meetings, things like that. And also when you are creating a group contract, I always find it's beneficial to have, everyone kind of check off on it, whether you sign off on it or, just give the go ahead with an email or a head nod, whatever it is, but everyone being on the same page. And then also work plans can also kind of fall under this group contract category because I know that's something that your offices are already implementing. And so you can implement some of these group contract rules within your group plan or your work plan as well. You can go down, Molly. The next slide is the benefits of group contracts. And so group contracts allow employees to take an active role in setting the tone for group interaction. And group contracts can help motivate ownership of learning and ownership of the outcome of that project. And so some benefits of group contracts is to identify expectations, communicate those expectations, and help employees articulate those expectations. Also to facilitate employee reflection on past experiences and communication practices, transferable skills for future work and relationships. And then also to increase that sense of community within the work environment. So if you have those group contracts, it's basically just another form of communication. And as we touched on, communication is one of the things that we feel, is potentially a more challenging aspect of working within a group. I don't believe you can ever over communicate. I went to school for 6 years to get 2 degrees in communication. So I believe in over communicating, if anything. I don't think that's even possible to over communicate. So it definitely, when we have those group contracts in place and we are communicating frequently and effectively, can help foster that positive work environment and create that sense of community. Go to the next slide, please, Molly. So this is a connection slide. So all this content that we've learned today and all this PD we've consumed, you can see how the roles within a group, like group roles and group norms, they help form our group behaviors overall. And they ultimately help form how effectively we are able to work in a group, behave in a group, and then produce that outcome of group synergy, which is the overall goal, to have that group synergy. And this is a constant process that all groups go through and work through. You can go to the next slide, Molly. Thank you. And so you have those task roles, disruptive roles, and relationship roles all help form to create and produce whatever that common goal is. So overall, the common goal is group synergy, but you might have the specific goal of your project as well. Go to the next slide, please, Molly. And then we just want to leave you with some action steps. So to reflect again, this is just open-ended. You can put it in the chat, or you can just, think to yourself, what have you. But what are you going to do today to improve your group synergy and your team synergy? What can you do? Maybe that's just taking these self-reflection steps and, being more aware of how you operate as an individual in the workplace, and trying to improve on that and benefit yourself. And maybe that's your action step today. And I think, that's really any coworker could ask of you. Really all we could ask of you to do today is just to take these self-reflections that you've done and to help improve yourself. But also, if you're a team leader or take on that leadership role potentially in groups, what could you do in your next group setting to improve that group synergy? Knowing the information that you know now that you're leaving the session. And then what will you work towards in the next month that could benefit your group, whether that's your office or your next group you're working in. Maybe you're working in a group now that you're thinking like, oh man, Bob is such a distractor in our group that we're working on this project right now. Like, what could I do to benefit the group and help, mitigate his role of being the distractor? And then, is there a role you would like to change? Is there a role you'd like to change about yourself? Is there a role you would like to change about maybe one of your employees if you are a team leader, and you can have that conversation with them, knowing what you know, and moving forward. So those are some action steps we wanted to leave you with. And then we also have some great resources with books and articles that you can check out. And these are linked in the slides if you download them. And then also you can look on our website. And then moving forward, Molly, we're going to open the floor for questions. We have about 3 minutes left, but it's okay if we go a little over. The meeting won't kick us out or anything. So if you need to hop off right at 10, we completely understand. But if you would like to stay for some questions, we would love to answer them. I see Patrick is in the chat. He says, implicit norms are dangerous because everyone has different ideas of how this works. That's very true. Experience, past and present, gives everyone a different perspective. I agree with that, Patrick. I think that's why creating a group contract is a great best practice. I know that that takes time, and sometimes we're like, oh, we've worked with these people before, we know what's expected of us. But that's when that group think can kind of come into play, and also when things can fall through the cracks. So if we just make it a best practice to form some explicit norms, and it doesn't have to be formal, it can be casual, but just making sure that everyone knows that, what's expected of them and that they're on the same page, can help promote that group synergy. And those implicit norms can be dangerous. And so I think you'd have to work with someone for a really, really long time to really understand where that implicit norms fall. But I think even if you have those implicit norms, you can know like a skill set of someone, and maybe you have that implicit norm of, okay, I know Molly's going to take care of that because I've worked with her for X amount of times and on X amount of projects. But you can still check in with them, right? You can still have that explicit norm of checking in on them with them, like, hey, I know you typically do this, so just making sure you're going to, type of a thing. So you can kind of bridge that gap with that mentality and that communication aspect again. Ron Johnson says, the slide spoke briefly to heterogeneity. He had to Google that. It can't be overstated that respect and appreciation for cultural differences greatly affect the success of groups and trust in group dynamics. I think this topic could be explored further in greater detail when discussing groups of any kind. I agree, Ron. And I think it is one of the biggest advantages to have coworkers and people in your group from different backgrounds, whether that's different skill sets, different work backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, what have you. But it is considered one of the biggest benefits and one of the biggest positives and promotions of effective outputs is to have people with different ideas and different backgrounds and different skill sets a part of your group. That's part of that collaboration and that idea of group synergy, that the sum is greater than that of its parts. I'm misspeaking on that, but I completely agree. And I do think that could be explored further for sure. So there will be a survey that goes out on Monday. And if that's something that you are more interested in, maybe we could touch on that in another training in the future more effectively and kind of explore that topic more. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick said that his biggest flaw is thinking everyone thinks the way he does. You know, Patrick, not to kind of dig on my boss here, but sometimes I think that Amy does that too. She kind of thinks that we can read her mind sometimes. I think she would admit she's guilty of that as well, because she, you know, sometimes she says, oh, I thought I told you that, or what have you. So sometimes we as her employees have to remind her, hey, Amy, you know, you never told me that, or hey, Amy, what do we need to do with this? But I think that that's great that you are able to do that self-reflection and know that that's your biggest flaw, so you can try to grow from it and be better about it as well. Okay, so I don't see anything else coming in the chat, and it is 10:01, so please feel free to hop off if you need to. And then I just wanted to reiterate again that that website I put in the chat is where we are housing all of the recordings and the slides from today. And again, you will receive a follow-up survey. It will be coming from our center's email. So be on the lookout from that. This follow-up survey will come from icsps@ilstu.edu. And I believe that is all we have today. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. Stay warm and safe. I know it's freezing out and snowing. It was snowing here yesterday again. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm very thankful that we are working from home right now. But yeah, just have a great weekend, everyone, and have a great rest of your Friday.